Welcome to the Marc Podcast. Welcome back to the Marc Podcast. How's it going? Today's guest is Anthony Lazzaro. Anthony, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, man.
Long time
This has been, we've known each other for like 11 years. You said it like 2 minutes ago. It took you 10 years to get in this chair. Exactly. You're here. I haven't had the chair for 10 years, but you know what? We're here. I'm excited for this podcast episode. I'm excited for this conversation. So tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
So Michigan transplant, obviously just like yourself.
Yes, sir.
Been out in California for about a year and a half now, and have a brand agency, focuses on brand activations. Came up through music, tech, all kind of by accident, and healthcare by accident as well.
You've done a ton of shit.
Done a few things.
You don't even have to be modest here. You can say it. You've done a ton of things. That's actually why I wanted to have you on, is because you and I have known each other since we were in college. You went to Central Michigan University. I went to Michigan State, and go green. And so we connected back then when we were working for an event music company called Life in Color, also known by Dayglow. And then fast forward, whatever it has been, like 10 years, and we're sitting here today doing this. And since all of that, you've done a shit ton of things. You've started up your own brands. You started up your own consumer products. You've worked on just branding in general. You've worked in music. You've worked in tech. You've worked in consumer goods. You've done a lot of shit in the last 10 years. So we're going to talk about all that today. But yeah, am I summing up everything?
Yeah.
Perfectly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think,
go.
you just got to pursue things that are of interest, and really over the last decade, that's what I've done, and that's what I'll continue to do.
There we go. So, all right, so let's take it back to the 2011. That's basically, I think, when we first came into contact, 2010, 2011, somewhere in that range. And so taking it back to Life in Color, Dayglow, all those good times, kind of what got you into all of that? And then what are just kind of talking about our history too. What are some of your earliest memories of like us knowing each other?
Yeah, I think we'll start there with my first impression of Marc Kolser.
Oh, God.
I didn't really have a choice. Like we were going to form a relationship one way or another. And because we were doing similar things. Yeah. One, we really didn't know what we were doing. Mm-hmm. We just had an interest in throwing events and making sure everybody had a good time kind of at the core. Yep. Right. And we were in this new environment, college. We knew that we could throw parties, but we weren't the people that were partying. Yeah. Right. We were just making sure everyone else had a good time and also paid for the tickets. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I think when you look at kind of the arena that we were individually in, which are two separate college campuses, the inevitable thing you do is just start to expand other college campuses. And coming together instead of competing against one another, coming together made a lot of sense. Yeah. Right? Let's make sure everyone has a good time. Let's leverage our network and resources and brains and bring even better events and more events. So I think for you, I knew Marc Kolser because Marc Kolser was the Facebook guy, right? And everyone's like, oh yeah, Marc Kolser on Facebook, and he does X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, great, I want to get to know this guy. Because I had a lot of profound respect for you because you were putting yourself out there and you were creating these different lanes. And I could relate to that in a lot of ways, just different campus. So I think, my first impression was like larger than life Marc Kolser, get to know Marc Kolser, and it's great guy, really good intentions. I'm big on intentionality. You just wanted to build, right? And you wanted to do it in the right way. So that was my first impression of you and how I got to know you. And we did some fun things together.
Remind me what your Venmo is so I can Venmo you after for what you just said. Yeah. Well, what did I say? I was going to pay you for saying all those nice things?
As much as Topo Chico's going to pay us here.
Yeah, man. No, I appreciate it. And honestly, my impression of you was exactly the same of when we first connected. I think there was so much back then, especially when you're in college and you're trying to make a name for yourself. There's a lot of people that get into that mentality of we should compete against each other, right? And you and I were doing a lot of the same things, but at different universities. You being at Central Michigan, me being at Michigan State, and we never competed. Like, it was friendly from the jump, and it was always love. It was always, every time I came to Central, you treated me with the greatest respect. You always had, there was always something fun to do. Way too many wild times, and events that probably took years off our life with just all the wild times that we had. And then fast forward to, we've seen each other's growth throughout the last 10 years. That's been super fun to watch, and kind of how we've navigated different industries, and seeing you go from just drastically different industry to drastically different industry and learn what you've learned, and and apply your abilities and everything like that, expand your abilities in different ways. It's been really fun to watch. And it's crazy we were talking about this before we started the podcast, but crazy to think about how far we've come in the last 10 years, and then also what the next 10 years is going to look like. I was actually mentioning to somebody in, I think, the first episode that I did with video, that I just recently turned 29, and I was talking about how as you get closer to 30, I feel like when I was 20, I looked at 30 as like 30, you're old as fuck, right? And when and when in reality, though, I feel like the way I look at it now is 30 is like being 20, but with experience.
Yeah.
And so you're still young. You still have the ability to like take control of your life, change what you're doing if you don't like what you're doing. But now you're going into it with experience, because when you're 20, and I don't want to completely reiterate myself because I already said this in the first episode back with Brooke Swallow. If everybody hasn't watched that, you should go watch that. But when you approach things at 30, you know a little bit more. You're not going into it so like inexperienced and broad-eyed and everything like that. Now you're going into it with a narrower focus. You have a better mindset on how to approach everything that you're doing. And when you're approaching a new industry like you've done, how you've gone from a few different industries, you know how you need to acclimate yourself to that industry, how you need to learn, how you need to get comfortable with what you're doing. And so it's just it's like that life transition, going from inexperience to experience, and then being able to take on everything with that, knowledge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I just turned 30 this year, so I think it's a starting line in a way. And if we think about it, when we met, we went our separate ways in different cities. Like, you've been out here in LA for a while. I just moved out here. Mm-hmm. But we diverged. Right, we put our 10,000 hours in a lot of different ways, and in that you're building experiences, know-how, capabilities, network, but also a reputation and an approach, and all these different habits that have been formed over the last 10 years. And now you have the ability to do things on your own. I mean, we're sitting here in this podcast studio, right? You didn't know how to do any of this, right? And you figured it out. And you've been evolving, but like, that's the approach that you and I have taken with everything that we've done, right? We got to be able to go from 0 to 1 ourselves. And we also wanted to, right? We wanted to figure out those intangibles, and those just compound. Those compound, just like relationships, just like experience and everything else. So I think, if you look back holistically on it, we're 30. Well, you're 29. It's like
close
we're
enough.
Basically 30.
We round
right?
up. Yeah, I'm 30.
But when we're 10 years ago, we were at the beginning of starting to know stuff.
Yeah.
Like, up until that point, we didn't really know that much.
Right.
Right.
100%.
And so like, we've been at it for 10 years. And so if you look at hopefully what's decades from now, we're just closing out kind of the first chapter.
Right.
And it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. And that's also something we talked about before we got onto this. We had a great conversation before we started the podcast, but it's the evolution of things, right? Like how we start off, kind of like, if you think about where we were 10 years ago, I don't think either of us probably guesses that we're in our shoes that we're in now, right? Like, I thought my life was going to play out very different. When we first met, I wanted to be a sports agent. That's what my goal was, right? And I'm completely not doing anything similar to that. And now there are, I guess, some aspects of what I like about, being a sports agent that, I still apply to this day of just general interest. But we evolve. And so sometimes when you're evolving, it's also your goals change, your life priorities change, and where you want to take things changes. And, and we talked about that before this, of even with, the podcast is kind of my next evolution. I've always enjoyed having these conversations with people. You and I have caught up over the years, and we have these great conversations, and it's like, damn, if somebody else could listen to this conversation, it would be really great. It'd be, I think the amount of times I said to somebody after we had a great conversation, man, this should have been a podcast, happened so many times that eventually I was just like, okay, fuck it, I got to start a podcast, right? Yeah. And so that's where the evolution process comes into play, of like, no matter where you were and no matter where you think you're going, there's always like different things that are going to happen throughout that process, and then you kind of evolve into the next version of yourself, and then we'll evolve from here to our next version, right? Like, it just keeps on, you keep on evolving. You said you've been in California for the last year and a half. Well, for most of that last year and a half, we've been in COVID times, right? And we're still obviously dealing with COVID and everything, but the world is opening up more and more by the day. So I would say for you right now, what is the biggest difference coming from Michigan and moving to California? Did you live anywhere else in between there?
I lived in Chicago for a bit during the first startup. But was probably there 4 days a month.
Okay.
If that, lived down the road for like 2.5 years.
Okay. So going from the Midwest in general to LA, what has been the biggest difference for you?
Well, I wasn't planning on moving out here. I think I've always had an interest, but I wasn't planning on it. And an opportunity came my way that was, something I couldn't pass up and I was passionate about. So I think my mindset going into it is like, okay, well, if I'm going to make this move beyond just like this one opportunity that will last X amount of time, which is to be determined at the time.
Yeah.
What do I really want to gain out of it? Right. Because I'm leaving so much behind. Like I moved from Grand Rapids, Michigan, loved Grand Rapids, loved the people there, was involved in the community deeply and kind of throughout the state in different organizations, like had everything you could ask for there.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, if I'm going to sacrifice this in many ways and give it up, what's next for me? Why does LA, SoCal make sense? And really it was to challenge myself more professionally and socially in ways that I couldn't where it was previously.
Yeah.
So for me, I've experienced a lot in a year and a half, peaks and valleys. And overall, the valleys haven't been detrimental.
Right.
They've actually been really good. I think there were so many things with the information I had at the time, the perspective I had at the time, that I set these expectations and like curiosities for. Moving out here, it was like the way that things have happened and the way that things have evolved for me and around me, I could have never imagined or predicted in a good way and in a challenging way. Yeah. So I think if I was to move somewhere else, and it's only been a year and a half, which I don't plan on doing, I would be like completely satisfied with what I set out to do already today. So it's basically all upside from here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of my favorite parts about LA is that it is so different than how we grew up. It's a very challenging environment. But it's also something that if you can, I always use the analogy of not an analogy, but just an example of if you want to become the next big thing in Michigan, right? Whether it's as an entrepreneur or whatever, obviously the competition there is much smaller because there's just less people, right? In general, if we're just going strictly off population, right? There's just a lot less people there than there is here, right? But then when you get into California, there's so much competition, right? Every day you meet somebody that's incredibly impressive. But what that also does, because some would look at that and say, well, that's super daunting, right? There's all this competition, yada, yada, yada. But you learn a shit ton from that, and that's been one of my favorite aspects of it is every day you meet somebody who's incredibly impressive out here. And, it might be somebody who has 200 followers on Instagram, but they're the most impressive, business mind that you've ever talked to, or somebody that has, this gigantic following because they were able to leverage their cat. There's just random things that people are able to do, and it's really interesting to learn from. And that's something that as an entrepreneur, I feel like you need that push and everything like that, because the way that you market something, right? When we were working with Life in Color back in the day, there was a way in which we had to market that in order for that to become the next big event in Michigan. How did we make it so that everybody in Michigan wanted to be there, right? Because up before they had worked with us, they had never been to the state of Michigan. And so,
only 2 shows.
Yeah. And so we can give ourselves a big pat on the back. We put in a lot of grassroots, marketing in order to get those events to be as big as they were. Right. And the amount of random jobs that we had back then and the amount of random things that we did to promote those shows. And then it ended up being a roaring success and we had a shit ton of fun through it. And so there's a different way that you market something now versus the way you marketed it back then. But the greatest part about being in California is that you're always at the forefront of how, what is the current marketing initiatives, what works. And usually when you look at other areas and things like that, those marketing approaches eventually apply to those areas too, like Michigan. It's just a little bit for later on, right?
Transferable.
Yeah, and so that's one of the nice things about being in California is that you start to see how brands are doing it here. And then, if you eventually move back to the Midwest or whatever, you now have that mindset. You now have that just that overall experience from being here that you can apply, if you are to ever move back to the Midwest or wherever the next chapter would be.
Yeah, I agree. And to touch on like the Dayglow thing, that was, pretty early for us, right? So like, I think for me personally, I came from a small town. I was born in a small town. I graduated with under 100 kids. We started with like 120 students beginning of senior year, graduated with 90.
Yeah.
We lost 30 of them somewhere along the way at school, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
But small town, right? And then I went to CMU, which a lot of people probably haven't heard of. People make fun of like directional school in Michigan because there's Eastern and Western and Central and Northern and all that. But smaller school, right? But for me, it was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And then I started doing concerts but small scale, right?
Yeah.
Locally and stuff like that, 500,000 people. And then this thing called Dayglow came in. And at the time I was working for Red Bull, and that was kind of like my first eye-opening experience to like experiential marketing, brand activation, brand management, marketing in general. And when Dayglow came, it was, can we actually do this here?
Yeah.
Like, are they going to allow this to actually happen here? And had a really positive experience because of the owners, because of the core team, right? Sebastian, David, Lucas, Patrick, Amir, like all the people that were a part of it, and Sheldon.
Yep.
And so for me, it took me out of this bubble that was all I knew at the time, right? These guys from Miami came, they're larger than life. And I look at who they are, their network, all of that, and I couldn't even comprehend it. And then to realize that they're these down-to-earth guys that gave me an opportunity to help build out the college tour when I wasn't qualified.
Yeah.
Right. So that to me was such a core kind of pivotal moment that it inspired me to go out and with a couple of key people, create my first startup, get into talent management, artist management. Wasn't planning on doing any of that. But like if that opportunity would have never happened, if those guys wouldn't have acted that way and whether they realized what they were doing for me personally or not, they had a lot going on. That was huge. That was monumental because it got me out of that bubble. And then and I was 20. So everything kind of just went from there.
Yeah, and I actually have a kind of a funny story. I don't know if I've ever even told this. It's such a minuscule story, but it ties in with that. Was when I first started working with Life in Color. And by the way, so for people once again who don't know, Life in Color, Dayglow, same thing. They went from the name Dayglow to Life in Color. So when I first started working with them, I remember one night, it was after one of the shows. It was super late. It was like 12:30, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning, somewhere along those lines. And Patrick says to me, he goes, "Hey, Mark, can you get a pizza?" And we were I want to say we were in like Kalamazoo or somewhere random where it was like small area. There's not many pizza places that were open that late. Maybe it was later than what I thought it was, but it was late, right? And so I remember calling this place, and I want to say it was like 2 minutes before they closed, right? Uh-huh. And so I called them, and I was like, "Hey, can I get a pizza?" And they're like, "Oh, we're closed. We're not going to be able to, we can't do that." And I was like, "Oh, hey, Patrick, yeah, there's they can't get anything. They're about to close." And he goes, "Mark, tell them I'll pay them whatever. We need the pizza. I'm starving. Need some pizza, right?" So I go, "Okay." I go, "All right, man. How much money? How much is it going to cost to make this happen? We really need a pizza. I know you got a few extra left. Come on, we need a pizza." And the guy said something that was like $80 or something like that. And Patrick was like, "All right, cool." So guy gets there. I think Patrick gave him like a $100 bill, and guy goes on with the rest of his night. We now have a pizza. The approach that I learned from that, experience I learned from that, was that anything is possible, right? Like I initially was ready to give up and say like, okay, I know it's basic, it's a fucking pizza at the end of the day, but I was ready to just be like, all right, pizza's not in our picture tonight. And Patrick was like, "No, dude, there's always a way to make that happen." And so, when you're 19 years old or however old I was at that time, that's something that sticks with you, is like there's always a way to make something happen. And that was the approach that those guys had. And I feel like they then pushed that or like taught that to us. And we've now carried that on because there's so many times that when it comes to a podcast, when it comes to what you're doing now, when it comes to moving out to California, moving to Chicago, doing whatever, so many times people are like, "Well, so how do you do that?" Right? And it's like, there's always a way to make it happen, but it's a matter of, do you actually go and make that happen? But you just have to find the lane. There's always a way. Because if you don't figure it out, somebody else has, right? So if they can figure it out, why can't you? And that I think comes back to like your own self-confidence and things like that. Do you believe in yourself to be able to solve that problem and figure out what you need to do? Let's say you move to California and then things aren't working out for you. You have to solve the problem of how to make it so things are, right? So we're just constantly problem solving and everything like that, but there's always a way to make something happen. And it's just a matter of, do you find that or do you give up? Do you get the pizza or do you give up?
Yeah, I agree. And big lesson there, don't get in your own way.
Yeah.
Right. When you're building and scaling something, regardless if it's a brand, a product, a music festival, whatever it may be, don't get in your own way. Like, you have to trust the people that you've put in place around you, even if you don't see eye to eye with them on everything, but don't get in your own way and don't let your ego get in the way either. You got to empower and enable people. And that was definitely something I took away from there. And I mean, and I'm not going to name names, but these people probably come to mind. We worked with people during that time that weren't technically associated with Dayglow, that we got involved with, that morally and ethically didn't align.
Yep.
Right. And so I think at a young age to be able to see the different viewpoints, and we're able to pick and choose, like, oh, I definitely want to take these takeaways from this person versus this person. And it kind of molded us. I mean, how old were you? You're younger than me, so you're like 19.
Yeah, I was like 18, 19 when I first started working with them.
I mean, when you go into that age, you're moldable and you're a product of your environment. You're going out from high school and into another world where you're starting to make decisions for yourself and starting to create your own habits and things like that. So, I look at it as like, I got super lucky to even be a part of that at that time in my life, because it changed the trajectory of my life in the best way possible. And, you never mentioned that. I've also never talked about that.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about it with Thomas, and like, that's it.
Yeah.
Right. But it's true. Cause like, no matter what you do in life, you always got to be able to think back of how you got there, who got you there, whether their intention and efforts were direct or indirect, So anyways.
I think that was even my first like business partner that I ever had was a guy that I ran a teen nightclub with when I was like 16, and he went to jail for tax evasion a few years later. And I probably shouldn't laugh about that, but for an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, you're like, holy shit, that guy. And I knew he was a slime bag when I worked with him, but I was able to pick that up at a young age. I knew that there were things that he did that weren't ethical, that weren't right, and it's at a young age, you also have to pick up on your own senses. We're smart people. Doesn't matter how old you are, you're able to think for yourself and to think about, is this right? Is this wrong? And so there were things where I knew in that position at 16 years old, there were limitations to what you can accomplish because you're 16 years old, but even legally, just what you can do. Right. But at the same time, I knew that the guy that I was working with, there were practices that he had that I didn't like. Right. Yep. And so when he went to jail a few years later, I was like, well, I'm not shocked, because like he was doing slimy shit when I knew him. So of course, I'm sure there were plenty of other things that he was doing outside of that. Right. And so, we're multiple people when we're young, and you have to be very cognizant of who you're surrounding yourself with, and also learning from, because in certain situations you can't help being around those people, right? Like, we've worked with the greatest people. We've also worked with some slimy people, right? Yep. And when you're working with somebody who's slimy, sometimes it can't be avoided. But what you do need to do is realize what they're doing and how to make sure that you avoid that in the future. We're talking when we were young, 18, 19, 20 years old. At this age, like, obviously, if we were to work with somebody slimy, we would just kick them out of whatever we're doing, and that we would never work with somebody who's slimy. Back then, we didn't have that choice, right? We weren't the ones who were making all of the decisions, so we had to kind of rely on some other people and rely on some of the people who had money and things like that. But we also were able to find that difference between right and wrong and make sure that, as we got further into business, we did things the right way, learned from people who did things the right way, and the people who did things the wrong way learned what not to do.
Yeah, in a sense, they had the keys, right? Yeah. In a way. And I think you're faced with two paths. So if you have something that happens to you working with people that might not align with you morally or ethically, and you're working with them, something might happen. Like, I had some tough lessons learned because I didn't know any better, and I just trusted people. And it didn't mean that I needed to stop trusting people and have my guard up and stuff. I still trust people till they give me a reason not to. But the red flags come up a little bit quicker now, right? And I have more awareness of it. But I think when it comes down to the two paths, you can either kind of go down to their level and go after them legally or whatever it may be. Or you can understand that who they are and how they operate is going to eventually catch up with them. Karma catches up with you for better or worse. So given that we were young, we're still young, these things happen. It's just a part of it. You can't predict the future, right?
Yeah.
You can only go with intentions and try to understand those other people's intentions. I think it's so important to, not lose sight of who you are in terms of trusting people, your morals, your ethics, and trust that it's going to work out one way or another for better or worse. That was a huge lesson learned at age 20, 21, that I'm so glad I took that one path instead of the other. Because those scenarios in different ways have happened from that. And it's like, you just move past. It's not gonna be the only thing you ever do.
Yeah. So I want to kind of touch into that a little bit. So obviously, as we graduate from college and when we kind of go our own ways and we're doing different things, how do you, when you have something set up in your mind of like, this is where I believe the next, 2 years, 3 years, whatever of my life is going to go. I'm working with these guys. I'm doing these things. When that doesn't work out, how do you handle that? More on a broad sense, I guess. Like, how do you handle something not going? Because in your mind, you're a smart guy. You had it set up that was going to work out. So when it doesn't work out, how did that affect you mentally? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty seasoned when it comes to that now. So, this recently happened to me. Had this vision, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah.
And what I did first was just listened, right? Okay, where are we at? How did we get here? Just listen, let them talk, right? You have to understand that other person's perspective because you have your own perspective, right?
Right.
And there's, your facts and their facts, but really it's what did you do up until that point to make them feel that way, right? Because at that point it can be feelings, it can be opinions. So you have to actually be able to look in the mirror and understand, okay, and let your ego get out of the way and let your pride get out of the way. Okay, this makes sense. Like I understand their perspective. I didn't come through on X, Y, and Z that they expected. Maybe it wasn't properly communicated. Maybe we evolved together. New variables came into the equation and things changed, different direction. Like that's okay. You have to be able to see past that because if you look at it, it might be 1 month, it might be 1 year, it might be 2 years of your life. And in the grand scheme of things, there's so many things that were transferable that you learned along that way. And as long as you can have a longer term vision, that's one chapter.
Yeah.
And it's totally cool. It's not a big deal. As long as you had good intentions and you feel like you stood behind those and you were aligned morally and ethically, there's no harm.
All right.
Right. And so, yeah, I walked away from a pretty tough scenario, recently. And I looked back and I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. I understand their perspective.
Yeah.
And it's all good. And the relationship's great, right? I have the best intentions for that company. I'm going to continue to be friends with them. I'm going to continue to support them. I'm going to continue to help bring them investment dollars and X, Y, and Z. And so you can take those paths, right? But if you have a broader, longer term viewpoint and you have the ability to kind of pause, stand back, put your emotions and ego aside and really understand the other perspectives, it's going to take you a long way, not just in business, but also relationships and everything. And the only way that you learn that is by experiencing it.
Right.
Right. And so because I could read a book, I could listen to a podcast or somebody's opinion, but until you actually live that and understand it and feel it for yourself, it doesn't really sink in. So luckily I had that experience when I was 21, and it's helped out a lot.
Right. And I think, in general, there's always going to be things that you think are going to work out in one way and then they work out in another way that maybe is not as favorable, right? Yep. And you just have to figure out how to pivot from there. And partly is knowing that making mistakes. There's times at 29 where I look at somebody who's 21 or 22 and I see them doing something, a mistake that we made before, and I'm like, fuck, don't do that. You can avoid that. And then I'm also like, but they need to make that mistake because we made that mistake and we learned from that, and we wouldn't be where we are today if we hadn't made those mistakes, right? And so there's so many times where I think that's where self-reflection is just so unbelievably important in personal life and business and everything, is that you constantly have to self-reflect and ask yourself, is there something that that I learned from the past, learned from this experience that I can take forward moving with me so that I can make sure that I have less problems moving forward, right? And that's just you have to take your ego out of it. And there's always going to be things that you didn't do right, or, like you said, communication a second ago, like communication's always got to be good. And so there's always going to be things that could be better, whatever, but you just have to continue learning from those experiences and apply that to your future experiences. And then also realize that like the world is never over. Like your life is not over. You can continue to move past. Sometimes it's almost, I think truly the biggest issue is a pride thing. And I think I've learned over the years, I try to remind myself all the time of this, is nobody else gives a shit as much as you give a shit. So I feel like a lot of times, take like a relationship, for example, right? When somebody's on Instagram and they're posting all these photos of them dating somebody, yada, 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 and then they break up, right? And they're like, oh, fuck. I just posted 12 photos with that person. Now this is awkward. Like, Valentine's Day's coming up. I'm about to be posting that I'm single and just drinking wine by myself. And they're embarrassed, right? They're like, their pride is hurt a little bit because they're like, shit, like, what do I do, right? The thing is, nobody else gives a shit. Like, you, in your head, you're like, people give a shit. They're going to think this is embarrassing. And it's like, no, everybody else is going to be like, all right, dude, cool. Like, on to the next one, And I think that's where we have to remind ourselves is that a lot of it is in our own head. And a lot of it is our own pride sometimes getting in the way of we want things to work out, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it takes that not working out so something else can work out, right? And it's so easy to lose track of that and to kind of approach everything with the idea of like, this has to work out. But once again, for things to work in life in general, we want to be happy, right? We want to be happy. We want to be successful. We want to be successful within like true life happiness, right? Which is a hard thing to accomplish. And so sometimes, once again, it takes that, maybe a failure or maybe something not going according to plans in order to reach that true happiness and to reach that where you, to the actual point of where you're enjoying every day, you're happy every day, you're loving what you're doing. And a lot of times it takes that, it takes the things not working out in your favor. And then you just have to learn from that and move forward.
Yeah, definitely got to be dynamic in the approach, right? But I think that a lot of people put like this social pressure on themselves because they put it out into the world and think they have to follow through. And I mean, I was guilty of that. We all were at some point.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, what's been super helpful is when I go and put something out kind of in the world, it's just like, I'm just interested in that thing.
Yeah.
Right. And previously, because of what I've done at a young age, a lot of times it was ahead of the people like my peers.
Yeah.
What they were doing. I was just doing things differently. It didn't mean that it was better or anything like that. It might have been perceived that way, but in my head, it was just different.
Yeah.
And because I was interested in those things at the time more than in whatever other people were doing for the most part. And because of that, I've gotten a lot of pats on the back along the way. And because of that, people are interested in what are you doing 5 years and 10 years from now? And because of that, there's some high social expectations. Whether I put something on social media, I have a conversation with somebody, it doesn't matter. It's just that reputation that you build.
Yeah.
And while there used to be a lot of pressure, like self-inflicted, to make sure that I make everyone proud and make sure that I help everybody along the way. And I think for me, I just switched the thinking to, I don't need to really have a 10-year plan.
Right.
Because what I'm doing, and this is what I tell people, because I get this question all the time, like, oh, this is amazing, like what you've done, what you're doing, what are you going to be doing in 5 years? And I just tell them, like, because this is real, like it doesn't exist today.
Yep.
Whatever I'm doing 5 years from now doesn't exist today.
Yep.
And it's the most simplistic answer, but then it gets people thinking like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like what you're doing most likely today isn't what you're going to be doing in 5 years.
Right.
And it might not exist today just because the way that technology and everything else is moving. And I think that you really just need to pursue things of interest. You talk about these different things that I've done, different industries, all of that. You just got to pursue things you're interested in. And that leads to new information, new variables, new opportunities, right? And you wanted to be a sports agent.
Yep.
And now you're here doing a lot of different things that you're really good at. But you wouldn't have known those things. And like you said, if you would ask yourself 10 years ago, if you'd be sitting here today doing what you're doing, the answer is absolutely not.
Right.
Well, you didn't know this information.
10 years ago, a podcast wasn't even a thing.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
Right.
So
like all those things didn't exist and you didn't have that information. So that's why it's so important for people, no matter what age you're at, so important for people to just pursue things they're curious in. It doesn't mean you have to do that for the rest of your life. It doesn't mean that you have to throw $100,000 into it. It doesn't mean that you need to go and make this social commitment to people. And in another thing on that topic, like if you're trying to create something new, whether it's a new startup or maybe a side hustle or a lifestyle business or something, so many people, they have failure to launch. And that happens for a lot of reasons, right? But meaning, if you know what that means, it's for the listeners, like just getting it out there and getting it going, because they keep it so tight to them that they think everyone's going to steal it because they think it's the best idea in the world and it's their baby, right? It's like, I'm the opposite. Like, you need to go out and talk to everybody about it, because they're not going to be able to execute like you can on it if you're that passionate about it. So go out and get feedback. Like, I'm building the agency right now and I have a website. It's not complete. I've showed the website and what I'm doing to probably like 30 people close to me, and just said, not giving them context. They don't know what I'm doing. I haven't told people that I'm starting this. And they've given me feedback, and it's been really good. Like, things I didn't even think about. And because of that, not getting in my own way, the agency is going to be better. The copy is going to be better. The coloring is going to be better. The hero video is going to transition smoother. All of those things. So hopefully those like resonate, but just, stay curious. Don't get in your own way. And it doesn't really matter what you're doing 5 years from now. Pursue what's, interesting right now.
Right. And I think that's sometimes where people we get lost in like, well, where am I headed? And sometimes it's like, you don't have that answer. Like, sometimes it's tough to know exactly where you're going to be 10 years from now. I've even thought in the last, year or so, all right, so when am I going to move from California, right? Like, how long am I going to be in California? And then I say to myself, Mark, why are you asking yourself a question that you can't possibly answer? Because there's going to be so many variables that come out that happen that you don't even know about right now. So how can you answer a question where there's something that could change tomorrow and all of a sudden you move to another location, right? So I think a lot of times we get lost in the like, I have to have a 10-year plan, a 5-year plan, whatever. But the difference is maybe 20 years ago that was possible to do or possible to even think about. The world is changing by the second. And I'm sure it felt that way 20 years ago too, but it very much feels like that now with social media and being able to see how the world is changing and things like that. We remember when Facebook first became a thing, and now they're a company called Meta, right? Like, every day something is changing. And when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, if someone told him 10 years later you're going to change the company's name to Meta, he probably would have been like, what the fuck is the metaverse, right? So there's always things that are changing, and so it's impossible to predict those things. And so all you can do is ask yourself, is what I'm doing today, is that fueling me? Is that inspiring me? Do I feel great about it? And if not, what do I need to do to change that in order to get to a position where I feel good about what I'm doing, where I feel inspired every day? And if you're asking yourself that question, if somebody's listening to this and they're like, I feel like I'm in a rut right now with work or whatever, also remind yourself you're not going to figure that out in a day. That's a question that takes a second to figure out. But I think the most basic form, I always bring this up when it comes to like when someone graduates with like a marketing degree from Michigan or Michigan State or Central Michigan or one of those. I always use the example of what are companies that you're super, super passionate about? And you see people all the time, they'll graduate from, like I said, Michigan State, something like that. And they'll be like, well, I'm working for Crest toothpaste when I graduate. And you're like, oh, so do you like really fuck with Crest toothpaste? And they're like, no, honestly, they were at a career fair and I applied and
benefits.
Yeah, and I got the job. And I'm like, okay, so are you passionate though? Do you love what they're doing? And a lot of times they're like, no, it's just a job. And I'm like, okay, so now take your normal everyday activities, what you're doing on a Saturday, what you're doing on a Sunday. What are the things that you're passionate about? What if you're somebody that is waking up on a Saturday and they're playing Fortnite for a few hours, right? Well, there's, take somebody like that, for example, they're using a keyboard or they're using a controller, they're using a monitor, they're using, there's the company that produces Fortnite. All of those companies have marketing divisions. Why not apply for a job like that in with a company that you're actually passionate about? Because that's a huge difference between working for Crest toothpaste and working for a company that you strongly believe in. Now, if you believe in Crest toothpaste, by all means, work for Crest toothpaste. But if you're using Colgate at home, what are you doing, right? And I think that's something that I think people sometimes put a limit on what they can do. Oh, I couldn't get that job, And it's like, but you can. If you're watching ESPN every Sunday morning while you're eating your Wheaties, like, why not apply it at ESPN? Maybe you don't get that job at ESPN, but maybe you get a job at Bally Sports and you work your way up to ESPN. Maybe you get a job at, your local news station, whatever, but you work your way up. There's just, why put a limit on what you can do? But it starts with asking yourself the question, what am I actually interested in? What makes me, what am I passionate about? And you know that by just like normal conversations that you have with people. What do you generally talk about?
Yeah. And I mean, we weren't made to do one thing.
Right.
And so I think when you look at the Crest toothpaste and the Fortnite example, people might think very, very highly of Fortnite because they love it. But then Crest is like, oh, okay, well, there's a lot of people that work at Crest, and like people that work at Fortnite are really talented and they're out of reach.
Yeah.
And it just comes down to a confidence level in yourself.
Right.
Right. If you're in college and you come from high school and you don't have a lot of outside experience, you might be conditioned to think certain ways or be influenced by those around you. Like, it's a great paying job, great benefits. Crest toothpaste isn't going anywhere. This is a video game. It's going to phase out. So I think you do need to pursue those things that are interesting. And also, you got to have confidence in yourself. You got to be able to go for and apply for that Fortnite job.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, and here's another example to go a layer deeper.
Yeah.
Let's say Crest pays you a random marketing job, pays you $70,000 plus benefits and whatever else they give you. And maybe the Fortnite job is $60,000, right? Everyone around you is like, oh, I'm making X amount of money. It's like, okay, it's $10,000 less after taxes. And you're learning so many transferable skills that you actually care about. That's going to pay dividends, and compound over the next 10 years.
Yep.
Whereas if you're doing the same monotonous thing, and I'm not saying Crest toothpaste, you do that. I'm just using like
random
company as example. But something you're not really passionate about that they have you kind of in this square box, like that's actually detrimental. Like you should think no amount of money could get you to do that versus learning something that's transferable that's going to help you really grow and become one of your own. So I think for people, that are stuck in that place, they should definitely take that approach of have a little confidence and think about what's transferable and what can you build on.
Yeah.
You should always be evolving.
And even ask yourself, there's a lot more that we know than we really think about. Like, because once again, if you're passionate about something, if you're, I'll just keep using the Fortnite example. If you're somebody who wakes up and plays Fortnite for 4 hours, you probably have some ideas of like, man, it would be really cool if they did this, this, and this because you're passionate, because you're interested. And so then if you were to ever apply for that job, it's easy for you to say, hey, these are some of the reasons why I want to work for Fortnite. This is some of the, I think the parent company is Epic. This is why I want to work for Epic. These are some of the things that I would love to see accomplished, yada, yada, yada. Even the other day, I was on a phone call with a buddy of mine. I was like, oh, I want to show you something. Let me FaceTime you. So I FaceTimed him, and then I wanted to revert back to a phone call afterwards. Well, there's no way to revert back to a phone call. You have to end the call, then call him back. And I go, man, wouldn't it just be a nice fix if Apple put a button that said revert back to phone call or whatever? That's a simple fix. Well, if I love Apple products. I use primarily Apple products. If I was ever in the position that if the podcast and shit doesn't work out, and I need to apply for a job, I might have to apply to Apple and say, hey, these are some simple things that I've noticed that would be really cool if Apple could implement because I'm passionate about Apple. I use all of your products. I own your stock. These are different things that I would like to see happen because I think it would make the Apple experience better. But all of that comes from just knowing, being passionate about something and then, being curious about it. And as a result, you come up with these ideas of, hey, it would be really cool if they did this, if they did that. And all of that, once again, it just stems back to actual interest and not just taking something because it's a job and because, it might pay a little bit more or something like that. If you're really curious about something, if you're really passionate about it, you will perform better. And if you perform better, you'll move up quicker and you'll end up making that money that you want to make and more.
Couldn't agree more. Good example with Apple. Don't think you'll ever have to worry about that problem, but yeah. I think it's good value.
Yeah. So, okay. So now going back to, you've talked a little bit about it. So what are you currently doing right now? You said you're starting up this agency. So let's talk about that. What's that?
Yeah. So it's a brand activation agency. It's something I've been doing informally for years. Get to create cool projects and bring brands to life, help them show up with my friends, which is cool. So it's really 4 parts. What we focus on is content creation, fabrication, athlete activation, as well as marketing, digital marketing.
So what inspired you to get into all of that, inspired you to kind of go your own route? Just talk about that a little bit.
I think leaving the music industry, I was really passionate about it in a lot of ways. And I really liked developing talent, which you can relate to.
Yeah.
But I loved helping people achieve their dreams and what they're passionate about. And it's something that after I left, I continued to do informally. People that would contact me, help them out. I thought it was interesting, so I did it just for free, for fun. And these relationships, most of the relationships through this agency are people that I've known for a decade that we've diverged, we've stayed in touch the whole time, and they've put their 10,000 hours in. They worked with massive clients in various industries, and they're ready to take that next step. And so what I kind of found by accident, and what I've been asked to do is, hey, can you help me operationally on the back end? And for me, I want to really make sure that they can focus on their craft, because that's what's got them to this point.
Yeah.
Right. How do I help them sustain the business? How do I leverage across creating a more comprehensive solution for that brand manager, for that chief marketing officer of X company? And then how do I actually bring my own experience from a product growth and strategy perspective into the mix? And so this brand activation agency just made sense.
Yeah.
And what I like to do is, so I'll go build relationships with brand managers, CMOs, talk about their upcoming year, talk about their upcoming campaign, activation, and just start throwing ideas out. Not because I want to like earn their business, just because I'm curious about that and passionate about it. We get to this point where they're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. This would be awesome. We just don't have the ability to create this thing in real life for an event. It's like, oh, cool. I'm a partner in a fabrication company. They're like, oh, okay, that's cute. Like you guys build things like booths or something. And it's like, well, here's the client list. And they're like, oh, wow, this is huge. And it's like, well, here's the projects. This is big. What I love about it is I'm a very much behind the scenes guy. I don't like to be forward facing, flashy. I don't really care if people like the public or whatever knows who I am.
Yeah.
I really like to help elevate these people and these brands. And so for me, when I can go and talk to them, they have no idea who's behind the scenes. They have no idea the fabricators. They have no idea the content creators. And when I can go and give them access to those people and manage all of it, so it's, they don't have to deal with 4 separate companies, I found that it adds a lot of value.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So it's something that I guess, I've been working on for a little bit now, but it's informally been in the making for 10 years.
Yeah, that's very cool. So how do you decide to take that jump? Going from anytime, obviously, you're working for somebody else, there's a comfort blanket there, right? Of like, you're not the only one in charge. You don't have to, there's certain, I guess, like pressures that are taken off of your shoulders, right? So how do you take that jump? What makes you, I guess, what gave you the confidence to say, you know what, I can do this on my own, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do great with it, and I'm going to leave a comfort zone and go to something that might be a little bit less comfort at the beginning as you're getting started. What gives you that self-confidence?
I think what I would advise people on and what happened to me is different. So like what I would advise people on is if you have a day job or you have something, don't quit it and make this jump because you think it's cool. Like do it when it kind of pushes you over there to where you can actually sustain yourself financially.
Yeah.
Now, if you've had an exit or you're in a different financial place where you have a little bit of cushion, like you do it by just your time, So people that are getting started, you go by dollars, right? So you can survive. People that have those go by time. And so I think for me, I had a little crossover because I was informally like helping sell these art pieces, helping get commissions, helping connect them with clients for big budgeted items. And it just kind of naturally evolved into that.
Okay.
And then I also moved out here.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the plan for me to move out here. I was really planning to just focus on this one company. But being out here just kind of naturally evolved and happened. So, don't get in your own way. Just let it happen and take the chance. And yeah, like there's definitely pressure on me and my back's up against the wall right now. And, I got to bridge a gap.
Got to come out swinging.
I'm not worried about it. And I hope that doesn't come off as arrogant because I'm not trying to, but because of the experiences, because of the people around me, because of the talent, I'm confident in it and I'm excited, even though my back's up against the wall.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah. That's cool. So now both of us are super, super business oriented, and we've always been that way. So a question that I have for you, because I feel like I get asked this a lot, is how do you find a balance between your like business goals and then your just like life goals in general, in terms of maybe family, maybe in terms of like I guess like life goals in general, just like being happy and things like that. But I feel like sometimes business goals can get in the way of like real life goals. So how do you find a balance between the two?
When I do, I'll let you know.
Great answer.
No, I think for me, being business focused, that's just been my identity. Mm-hmm. Going back to other people's expectations of me. People think my number one goal in life is to become quote unquote successful or rich or have this huge company or whatever. My number one goal actually has nothing to do with business in life. And I don't really talk about this, but like my number one goal in life is to watch my kids grow up whenever that is appropriate. Like I'm not in a rush trying to do that. But that's like legacy stuff that lives beyond you. Like if I can take everything that I've learned, and really everything that I'm building is to build a good foundation for my family when I have one day. That's kind of my leaning principle. I don't really talk about that, but that's what it is. So I think my mindset's always a balance of business and personal relationships. Relationships are huge to me, and building them organically, authentically over decades. So I think I always take that approach. That's why I have this saying, people first, business second, ego last. Like that's the people first. Is like, it's really about the people. Businesses are going to come and go. And then also thirdly, with ego last, like just don't get in your own way with either of them, because your ego can get in the way from a business perspective and from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
Put your pride aside and just build meaningful relationships with people. And when you're doing business, like if you can't do it and it's out of your reach, like let them know. Cause again, everything catches up with you. So I think when you can be authentic and kind of open in that way, it can open some doors for you. So for me, to answer your question, the balance it all just meshes, and I don't let one override another. Now, it hasn't always been that way. Like I had to have tough lessons in order to learn that.
Yeah.
There was a point when I did my first startup and was in the music industry. I was on the road every day, different city every day, and I lost touch with my friends and my family. I was 20. I was outside of the bubble for the first time, and I was going to go make something of myself. And I was taking on the world. I had no idea what it meant. Right? And so I was just focusing my every waking moment into building this thing. And the thing was successful and did well, but I started getting called out by people I've been friends with since elementary school and my family. And that really stung, because those businesses are going to come and go. Those relationships are forever, hopefully.
Yeah.
So for me, it changed my perspective. And I've always tried to keep that balance in between. Now, where I've really lacked is personal time, like taking, self-care. And I haven't been into like meditation. Moving to California changes you in a lot of ways. I'm drinking Topo Chico now, eating a lot more avocados. But I also started doing hot yoga. And I think hot yoga for me, it's good because I'll train for a triathlon, so run, bike, swim, whatever. But yoga is good because it's a form of meditation. Like I'm impatient. I don't like to just sit still and be stagnant. But yoga, you're moving, but you're unplugged from technology. So when you have that, and at the last 10 minutes, you're just sitting there with unplugged in the dark, that's actually when I realized all the best thoughts came to me. That's when I had like, okay, I'm going to start this agency. That's when I came up with the name. That's when a lot of these things happen. But I can also think back to okay, what's really important? And the second thing that I started doing from a personal perspective is I have a lot of Google Excel sheets. So a lot of Google Sheets, and I have daily habit trackers for fitness, for nutrition, sleep, my daily bank accounts, where things are going. But the habits is a big one. So every day, and this is my intention, it doesn't always happen. You get caught up. But one thing that's really helped is, how many hours of sleep did I get? I used to think it was so cool to work on 4 hours of sleep and brag about it and say you're working X amount of hours. Like that stuff doesn't matter. Yeah. It's how effective you are. What really matters is actually, I think it's really cool if you're like, yeah, I got 7+ hours of sleep last night. I'm like, props. Yeah. Because it's important, right? 120 ounces of water a day.
There we go.
Super important.
There we go. I drink my gallon every day. I love that. Yep.
Super important. And then another thing that's really important for me is did I move, right? Did I go for a walk? Did I run? Did I exercise? Super important. And then the last thing is 3 things that I'm grateful for every single day. And it forces me to think back. And a lot of those things that I'm grateful for, actually, when I look at every day compounded over the months, over last year, over 2 years, actually really doesn't have to do a lot with business or work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree. I think it's same thing that you're talking about. I feel like for a while I lost that sense of balance too. And I remember at one point, I think I was in North Carolina for Thanksgiving or something along those lines. And my sister said to me, she's like, wow, you've been really present this trip. And I was like, oh, fuck. Because that implies that I wasn't present in previous trips, right? Yeah. And And that bothered me because I was like, damn, like I don't see my family all the time because I live in California. They're not in California. They're all over the country. And I was like, damn, that sucks that like they noticed that I was more present at that moment, but that I hadn't been previously. And so now I remind myself every time I'm home or whatever, enjoy these moments because tomorrow's not guaranteed for any of us. And so, make sure that you're enjoying that time with, your family, your close friends, your, people like that. And then, remind yourself that nothing is more important than those relationships because at the end of the day, you can have as much money in the world as possible. You could be Jeff Bezos, but if you're Jeff Bezos and unhappy, does it really matter? No. So that's the thing I try to remind myself. And even like my dad's very business oriented. He's not I wouldn't say he's a very emotional person at all. And I remember when I was like, I don't know, 21 or 22, he like pulled me aside one day and he was like, I just want to let you know, like, the most important decision I've ever made in my life was marrying your mom. And without her, like, none of this matters. Without, that the family life that I've created is the most important thing. And my dad, once again, he's not an emotional guy. So I was like, holy shit, like, this is real because I know that if he's saying that, he truly, truly means that. And he was saying to me, he's like, just don't get lost. Like, don't get lost in what you're pursuing, that you forget that there are other things that matter. Like, you're doing the things that you're doing with work so that you can, so that you're able to pay your bills at home and to lower some of that at-home stress and things like that. But the biggest thing is being able to come home and have a great, life that you're coming back to, right? And so he was like, that's something that you have to really think about is, finding your person, finding who you want to create that team with, who you want to create that family with and things like that. But he's like, there's nothing more important than that. And, and that's always stuck with me. And I remind myself of that all the time of like, I love what I'm doing business-wise and things like that. But, I thoroughly enjoy just spending time with my family and spending time with my friends and creating these awesome relationships. My business partner, Brad, with Roast Umber, when I was in his wedding, and that was super special to me. Just being in his wedding, being a part of that awesome day. It was, to this day, the most fun wedding I've ever been at in my life. I remember I called my sister and my brother-in-law the next day. I was like, hey, guys, your wedding was great, but Brad's was 10 times better. And it was so much fun. And being a part of that was, just a super fun experience. And I was like, man, at that point, I'm blending a few different worlds, right? It's my personal life with being able, being great friends with Brad, and then also my business life because he's a business partner of mine. And so, that's the thing is like finding that balance. And, sometimes you got to step away from your phone for a little bit. Sometimes you got to disconnect from the world a little bit and just enjoy that moment. Because otherwise you'll get to the pinnacle of success and you'll have nothing else but a just huge bank account, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And businesses come and go. Right?
Yeah.
Relationships don't. I think for me, I've gotten to this point where I don't know, California, like moving out here and everything that's happened has really solidified this thought. But and I don't want this to come off as arrogant or overly confident, but like the business side of my life is just inevitably going to happen.
Yeah.
The personal relationships, the self-development outside of that, that's where I'm focusing like a lot of my effort because the business side is cool and it's going. So I have to keep effort and consciousness of the other side.
Yeah.
So that's where I've been spending a lot of my time and, keeping those things going, which ultimately fuel this side, fuel the business.
And it goes back to the whole self-reflection side of things. Like you have to self-reflect. And then also I try to remind myself to also create a super comfortable environment that if the people around me, if there is something that I'm not doing, if I'm not being present enough, I want the people around me to call me out and I want them to feel comfortable to be able to call me out so that I can snap back into the, reality. And, I think COVID was a great reminder of what is most important because I spent a year where I didn't see any family members. I only saw one cousin during that entire year. And that was super tough for me. And that made me realize like how precious those moments are when you're with family. And, and so I was so badly wanted to see my family and wanted to spend time with them. And sometimes, that some of the good that comes from a terrible situation like COVID is it reminds us what is, it centers us and reminds us what is most important in this world. And that's the people that we love and creating, awesome experiences with them, awesome memories. All of us have awesome experiences together from, a simpler time, being young, being 19, 20. And we've taken that and we've still formed this great friendship that carries on throughout time. And I know 10 years, 20 years from now, we'll still be having these conversations. We'll be having the podcast episode number 2075 that you'll be a part of, and we'll be talking about, what we've learned in the next 10 years, right? What's in our next chapter. And, I think that's a really cool thing to just see our growth and to also continue to self-reflect and learn from our past experiences so that we can, take that forward in our future experiences.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think when I moved out here, the goal was twofold, right? That I mentioned earlier, was to challenge myself more professionally and personally. And because I knew I was leaving people that meant a lot to me, that was going to be a challenge. Like staying in touch with them, continuing to build the relationship. Everybody thinks I'm just going to turn around and never look back. Like, that's a challenge, but also meeting new people out here. I didn't know what LA was going to be like. I didn't know what SoCal, California was going to be like socially. You hear these stigmas, you hear these things, but until you live it, like so many people say, oh, California, all they care about is like what you do and how you can benefit them.
Yeah.
Right. It happens all the time. And then, there's a whole political side of it. Like those people that are making that, largely, not everybody, but largely, have never lived in California or really spent time in California. So for me, I just came with an open mind, and I got really, really lucky twofold. One, the people that I've met, they've been great people that are established in their own ways, doing their own thing, that care about you. And, I'm not going to add a ton of benefit to them. That's not why they wanted to become friends. They're already doing their thing. They don't need that. Right. But there's some other relation where it's like we both came from the Midwest, or we're in this same space, or we just clicked as a person. I got really lucky, the people that the friend groups that I fell into out here. And I also got really lucky that the relationships I made over the last 10 years are still good and authentic.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you put all that stuff together, it's like you can move out here and be really lonely. You can move out here and have bad experiences. You can move out here and get into like superficial situations. But luckily I had the complete opposite of that. And it actually exceeded my expectation with like how warm and welcoming everybody was, and authentic and supportive, and wanting to see you win and doing whatever they can to help you. It's been overwhelming. It's been really, really cool.
Yeah. That's something I remind myself all the time too, is that because there is that misconception of you come out to California, all the people suck, they're all blah, 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 right? But the thing is, there's shitty people everywhere, right? I always laugh when everyone's like, everyone in the Midwest is so nice. I'm like, I don't really know if that's true. There's a lot of shitty people everywhere, but there's also great people. There's great people in the Midwest. There's great people in California. And you decide if those people stay in your life or not. So if you're living in the Midwest and you've got great people around you, great, keep those people around you. If you're in the Midwest and you've got shitty people around you, well, maybe you need to make some changes, right? And same thing with California. If you come out here and the first people that you connect with end up screwing you over and they're awful people, okay, get rid of those people. You don't need them in your life. There are great people out here, but you decide whether those people stay in your life or not. So if you don't have a great circle, fix your circle. But there are, I don't care where you are, you could be in Antarctica, okay? Yep. There's going to be great people anywhere you go. You have to find them. And then if, sometimes there's addition by subtraction. Sometimes you got to remove some people from your life because they're no longer benefiting you in the way of, not necessarily in sort of a transactional way, but in the sense of like, they're not, their energy is not great energy, or they're dishonest people, or, whatever. So there's a lot of times that we have to remove people, but once again, doesn't matter where you're living. You could live in Michigan, you could live in California, you can live in Antarctica. There's always going to be good people. There's always going to be bad people, but either way, you determine who stays in your circle and who doesn't.
Agreed.
There we go. Agreed. All right. So, to wrap this up, it's been a great conversation, but I got a new segment at the end. It's a food for thought question. Oh. So, let me pull this up real quick, but just a quick food for thought question there we go. Okay. What could you pay more attention to in life? Well, food for thought. Think about it. I mean,
it's probably really similar to, like, I'm already aware of what I need to pay attention to. I just have to build that muscle, and it goes back to the relationships. Because I hold relationships so closely doesn't mean that I'm perfect with them, right? There's so much going on here, and things move so fast out here. I think in the beginning I said this has been a wild ride so far. I could do a better job still with the personal relationships, with the people that I'm not in proximity with.
Yeah.
And so I've been intentional. Like I've created a list. Like I have all these things that I see in like the daily habit trackers and all that just to help me. So I can take a step back and make sure that I'm connecting with those people. Yeah. So that'd be my answer. What about you?
I think for me, it's I think paying attention to like the little things in every day and the little things that we can enjoy. And so even, being in California, obviously we always talk about like the networking abilities and things like that, but also the fact that we've got the mountains 2 seconds from here and we got the ocean 2 seconds from here. And last week I went to the beach with my friend Morgan and we sat there and drank wine and just watched the sunset. And I was like, this is fucking awesome. This is a peaceful experience. It's fun. Neither of us is working. It's just we get to enjoy life right at that moment. And I think we have to take a step back and enjoy those moments and pay attention to the little things in life and the little things that we have available to us, right? It's very, very easy to come out here and get caught up and get sidetracked by the parties and the things like that. But also the fact that, once again, we've got the desert not too far from here. We got snow not too far from here. We got everything not too far from here. And you're able to take in all of that. And there's, the little coffee shops that are around the area and the art, random art. Even the other day I was just driving through downtown LA, just looking at all the art there. And it's beautiful. I think stopping to notice the little things, I think is what I'm trying to remind myself is pay attention to those little things. Pay attention to what truly notice like the fucking birds chirping in random situations. Like it's just taking the second to realize all the little things that are happening all around you and just, stopping and taking a second and enjoying life.
Smell the roses, right?
Damn right.
Well, hey man, this has been great. It's great to reconnect. Look forward to continuing to build.
Yeah, we got to keep doing this more often. We'll definitely have you back on the podcast because we'll need a update on how the company's working, how everything's going, and what you've learned throughout your experience and everything like that. So for people who want to keep up to date with you, where can they find you on socials?
So don't have a TikTok. I won't ever get one. Instagram's probably the easiest. It's just Anthony_Lazzaro.
You want to spell that out for people?
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people get it wrong. It's Lazzaro.
There we go. Yeah, I still get people who mess up my last name. They'll be like, Marc Kolker. I'm like, no, that's not it.
We were talking about this earlier, but I do have to mention this. Like, seeing you continue to grow and pursue different things. When you got into photography and you started taking photos, I would laugh out loud and just by myself hysterically when any guy thinks that you're one of the girls that you take photos of and tries to like slide in. It's so funny, man. Oh, it's so funny.
It's too often. The other day, this is TMI, but whatever. Probably like 2-3 weeks ago, I wake up to a Snapchat from a random account, right? It was like random numbers and letters. I open it and it's just some dude's dick over money. And it was like, want me to send you this, was like the text. And I was like, man, it's like 7:30 in the morning and I just woke up to a dick. Scarred. Yeah, I was like, my God. Like I was laying in bed, like first thing I see. And I was like, man, well, today can only get better because I just woke up to that. Obviously some dude who thinks I'm some chick. And it never ceases to amaze me how many people can't put two and two together. But hopefully they keep seeing the podcast. They finally figure out what I actually look like. And hopefully they just stop with those Snapchats in general because nobody wants that. Even if I was a female, nobody would want that. So hopefully those just stop in general. But I would definitely not like I don't want those to happen again ever. Especially not at 7:30 in the morning, right when I wake up.
What a way to start your day.
It's a brutal way to start your day.
Can't stop and smell the roses and stuff like that, you know?
Yep. So, and that's a good reminder to make it so random people can't just Snapchat you. Like I had to figure that out.
Snapchat.
Yeah.
Spent too much time on it.
Yeah. So, all right, man. Well, hey, this has been great time, great conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing the next chapter. I'm looking forward to seeing everything that you accomplish and, stay tuned. Big things are coming as always. The next chapter is beginning and I'm excited to watch it. So
appreciate it.
Yeah, man. All right, everybody. See you guys.
Later.